Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's presentation, Autumn in the Americas, the Science and Splendor of Fall, is brought to you by Nat Hab Expedition Leader Arthur Kampmann. A little bit more about our presenter. Arthur holds a bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in environmental studies from Eckerd College and transitioned from a 3-year publishing career in New York City to pursue his passion for guiding after a transformative trip to Patagonia in 2013. He spent 5 years as a sea kayaking guide in Alaska's Kenai Fjords National Park, where he achieved his life goal of kayaking with killer whales and worked at remote wilderness lodges to develop expertise in bear ecology and ethical wildlife viewing. Since joining Nat Hab in 2022 as an expedition leader, Arthur has specialized in Alaska and U.S. national parks, combining his guiding skills with his passion for landscape and wildlife photography. Thank you for being here today, Arthur. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for tuning in today to learn a little bit about fall in the Americas. And there's so much to talk about, so I'll just get right into it. Once again, I am Arthur Kampmann. I'll be hosting this webinar today, and so like Brooke mentioned, I'm a photo expedition leader for Nat Hab, and so I just finished up 2 different seasons that encountered beautiful fall colors. One would be up in Alaska, up in Denali. We were able to see some beautiful fall colors, as well as along the Kenai Peninsula. And then, of course, we were over in Maine for the fall time classic trip over there. And both were great successes, great fall colors. So happy to talk about those today for sure. So a little bit about what I'm gonna cover today. On this presentation, I'm going to go a little bit into the forest ecology, just kind of a background on what's going on in the forests in Americas, and then I'm going to break down what's happening on fall colors and why we get to witness this incredible display of colors. And then I'm going to discuss some autumn destinations, places that you have the opportunity to go and see fall colors with Natural Habitat Adventures, and I'll also highlight a couple that you can maybe see along the way if you're driving to or wanted to add some time on. And then I'll finish up with just a couple helpful fall tips, some fun books, stuff like that. And so into the forest we go. And so I'm going to start off with conifers, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time discussing conifers today, but they're obviously very important to the ecology of North America and the Americas. And so conifers are evergreens, which means essentially they're going to keep their needles year-round. They're not shedding those. I will get into a couple, especially one specific type of conifer that does shed its needles a little later on. But conifers are vitally important to the ecosystem. And our first kind of appearance of conifers on the landscape is going to be roughly 300 million years ago, but they became a little more widespread during kind of the age of the dinosaurs, kind of that rough age, 250 to 60 million years ago is kind of when conifers really started to become widespread. And now conifers their needles are tough because they're not losing their leaves annually. Their needles are very tough, so they're really an efficient system. They're able to hold moisture really well. They can photosynthesize in cold and dry conditions, and they just evolve traits over time to handle really intense colds and really intense warm periods. You know, this is a photo on a very cold morning from Yellowstone National Park. I believe it was about minus 15 degrees, so not the coldest morning ever, but you got to think they can handle minus 40. And then in the summertime, they're going to be up into the high 80s sometimes. So big range and not losing their needles year round. It's a really efficient system. Whereas I'm going to focus a lot more today on deciduous trees. And deciduous trees evolved after conifers. So they evolved roughly 100 million years ago, along with other flowering plants. But deciduous trees have a much different strategy than the conifers. So you can see in this photo, this is Maine in the fall time, the deciduous trees sprinkled with the conifers, the evergreens, kind of popping in the backdrop as well. And I think that's one of Maine's great things is that mixture forest. But in the fall time, these deciduous trees, they shut photosynthesis down. Eventually, they're going to drop those leaves to conserve water and energy throughout winter. And so it's a lot more of a seasonal operation. They almost go into like, some might say, a hibernation state, whereas the conifers, the evergreens, they don't utilize that same system. So in the wintertime, deciduous trees are going to look a lot like this. This is a stand of deciduous trees in Connecticut that lost their leaves a long time before. And they do that for a lot of different reasons. But one of the main ones is in the wintertime, the ground is frozen. So trees can't absorb as much water. And so they're going to lose a lot of water through these tiny openings called stomata. And so by dropping their leaves, they conserve water. And now also another factor to think about is without leaves on the branches, they've lost a lot of weight. And so as snow happens to fall, if that is going to get trapped on the branches in the leaves, it's going to get very heavy and could lead to branches breaking, which the trees do not want to endure. And so that can be a big issue for trees. And, I know a big thing that can happen, especially in New England in late October, is the nor'easters come up the coast, and it can be devastating to the big oak trees and maples, and really kind of ruin the fall time party sometimes if that comes in early and all the leaves are still on the tree, and then those storms come in and the branches are extra heavy and they are susceptible to breaking, especially the oak trees. They seem to really not handle it well. So losing the leaves is an amazing strategy. They've evolved over time. Now, this is one of the things, one of the first scientific things we learn when we're younger. It's that process of photosynthesis. But essentially, chlorophyll is the green pigment that's in a tree's leaves. It captures sunlight, and this green pigment absorbs the light's energy and converts it into chemical energy during photosynthesis. Now, using this sunlight along with carbon dioxide from the air and water from the roots to make food in the forms of sugars. And so trees are going to utilize these sugars to grow and also to store food during the lean times, during winter or even nighttime. So it is amazing how one of the first things, I think I remember being very young, learning about the process of photosynthesis in school, and how it still rings true today and is still just vitally important to everything we get to see and experience. And now the leaves are incredibly important, especially, obviously need good leaves to see fall colors. But leaves, in a way, work kind of like natural solar panels. They capture sunlight and convert it into energy through photosynthesis. Now, inside of each leaf, chlorophyll absorbs light and uses it to turn carbon dioxide into sugar, while the plants fuel while releasing oxygen. Now, conifers and deciduous trees use their leaves, needles for conifers, kind of like solar panels. And so in the fall, as fall time comes in, on the stem there, it's essentially called the abscission zone. And that's kind of at the base of the leaves. And this is an area that's going to start to get pretty brittle as the fall time starts to happen and leaves are changing their color. And eventually this is just going to fall and die off. But this leaf is in many ways a solar panel, kind of naturally fueling energy for the tree to give it energy for those big summer months. And the chlorophyll is a present pigment within the tree. Now, also the inside of the tree is just an amazing, just really an incredible system. And in many ways, it mirrors the human circulatory system. Now, what we have is called the xylem and the phloem, and I'll get a little more in detail on the next slide about that. But the xylem and phloem flow like veins and arteries, and they're carrying water and nutrients through every limb and leaf. Now, inside of the tree, you also have the cambium, and that is a thin living layer of tissue in plants that produces new cells, allowing stems and roots to grow thicker over time. And the cambium sits between the xylem and the phloem, continually adding new wood inside and to the bark on the outside. So the growth of the cambium is what forms those annual rings on a tree that we have in these areas, and then also can help to heal wounds that a tree could have. So if it were to lose a branch, it could help to heal that wound. And so just kind of a little bit more of an in-depth look at that xylem and the phloem. And so the phloem essentially is going to take sugars from the leaves and bring them down into the tree. And while the xylem is actually doing a bottom up system, so it's taking water and minerals from the roots and bringing them to the top. So it's absolutely incredible. And I do love to compare it to kind of our arteries and veins, the human circulatory system, and just think that, these trees, as we look at them, they also have a similar system going on inside of them to transport nutrients throughout it. So it's absolutely fantastic and incredible. And then you also have to think about competition within a forest, right? And so trees are going to compete for light and water resources, like a lot of things compete in the world. So they're competing, and there's only so much to go around. And so trees essentially are going to spread out wide branches as the taller trees are going to spread these wide branches out, the big canopies. And what they're trying to do is get as much light as possible. So it's a fight for light, but they're not moving or attacking like some fights happen, but they can grow taller, spread wider, and then get those roots in even deeper to get all those nutrients that a tree wants. Shockingly, one of the first people to document this is Charles Darwin, when him and his son Francis noticed that plants were bending towards light, what we today call phototropism. But kind of fascinating to think that Darwin did document this, and one of the first people to have it documented that plants are moving towards light, which is just incredible, right? And now within a forest like this, as you get to the end of a forest, you hit what's called the climax forest. You're going to have a lot of different stages within a forest, right? You're going to have the canopy, you're going to have the understory, and some trees want all of the light, and some trees only want some of the light. And so they kind of have to figure that role out. But what's kind of interesting is to think that smaller saplings will be in the forest, essentially waiting their time for a bigger tree to fall, and then they can grow really fast because they've been kind of waiting patiently, building up nutrients, and then they can grow really big in a relatively shorter amount of time compared to that natural cycle. So it is fascinating. And, I think about Maine on this one, whereas I think, okay, like some of the sugar maples, they want a lot of light, whereas an understory tree like the stripe maple, it's always going to be down in the bottom, and really can usually be pretty dark in a forest where you're finding stripe maples, whereas the sugar maples, of course, much lighter. Now, this area where we're going to see fall colors is what's known as the temperate deciduous zone. It's a region kind of characterized by 4 distinct seasons, and they have trees that lose their leaves in the fall time. So these forests can be found, obviously, eastern United States. You can see it's basically got it all covered there. Then down into South America, of course, so region Patagonia that I'll talk about a little later. And then in kind of the upper Rockies, even California, up to Alaska, North America. And that's going to be my main focus today. But it is cool to note that if look over to the other part of the world, a lot of other places to see incredible fall colors. China apparently has amazing fall colors, Tasmania, New Zealand, a lot of Europe. So definitely kind of gets the imagination going on places you could see this marvelous time of the year. Now, what's going to trigger this major change? And essentially, it's the length of daylight. So it's known as the photoperiod, and that is going to shorten. And that's what signals to the trees that the growing season has come to an end. Within photoperiodism, it's kind of the response to the length of day and night. So it's going to essentially help an organism know what season it is, and let them know important events like flowering, leaf fall, germinating, stuff like that, because temperatures can often steer a tree wrong. You know, you could have a really nice warm day, warm week in February, and the tree starts to get it going, starts to get the buds going. That would actually be pretty horrific for a tree, because March could end up being all snow and cold. Therefore, it's jumped the gun, went too early. And so really fascinating recent studies have come out about how this all works. And essentially, trees detect this change through photoreceptors. And these photoreceptors are known as photochromes, and they're light-sensitive pigments that measure day length by sensing red and far red light. So it's sensing those two types of light, and it's actually the second type of light, that far red light, that's the most important, because that is the tree sensing the amount of nighttime that it is experiencing. So if a tree starts to experience more nighttime, that's going to be one of the triggers to start the fall colors. Now, there are, of course, other factors at play to fall colors, not just the length of day. Temperature is a factor. It's not the factor, but it is a factor. And then moisture levels throughout the year are very important. You definitely don't want too much rain, and you definitely don't want too little rain. You definitely don't want really hot weather, and really cold weather early on can also be bad. So it's definitely somewhere in the middle. One good thing that can happen, as let's use September as a month rolls around, if you can get some warm days, not hot, but warm days, to get that inside of the tree, the xylem and the phloem, really transporting those nutrients around, and then cool nights that kind of constrict the flow. So that right there, you are kind of in your makings for some really good fall colors, especially if you've had, you know, not a decent amount of rainfall, because these trees obviously do love water. And so if they are drought stressed, they're going to lose their leaves early, or their leaves can essentially just not be as vibrant as you've seen. So I'm sure all of us in time, if you've gone to a place to see fall, have seen falls that are just spectacular, and you've seen falls that are good. I dare say falls aren't bad, because it's just a great time of the year to be out, regardless of how good the colors are. But those major factors do help. And, you know, those photochromes are such a cool aspect on the tree, where they can sense those two different types of light, and essentially, you know, determine that, we're getting less daylight than we were. It's now time to start this fall time trigger. Now, within the leaves, you have many different pigments. And so I was talking about the chlorophyll earlier. Obviously, that is what we're getting all late spring, summer, and early fall. But then as the chlorophyll stops being the major pigment that's showing, other pigments start to appear, some that were there the whole time, and some that are being produced as fall time comes around. So xanthophylls are the in the carotenoid family, and they're going to give us the beautiful yellows we see along the you know, out in the fall time. And so xanthophylls, being part of the carotenoid family, they are in the leaf the entire time. They actually kind of work as a way in the summertime to help protect the leaf from excess sun damage and excess sunlight. So it's, in a way, it's kind of like a sunscreen for the tree. But as chlorophyll becomes the least dominant pigment, xanthophyll and carotenoids can become more present. And so carotenoids are also within the leaf the entirety of the leaf's lifespan. So, you know, from the spring, summer into fall, as the chlorophyll fades, those carotenoids do become more present. And so carotenoids, obviously very famous, carrots have carotenoids in them, so we're all kind of familiar with them. But in a way, carotenoids and xanthophylls are kind of like the hidden artists of fall, being there the whole time, but starting to appear as chlorophyll fades. So really cool in that sense, and definitely gives some of the best, those yellows and yellows and oranges. And then the reds actually come from a compound called anthocyanins. Now the anthocyanins are not present in the leaf's life year round. So they're not there in the summertime. They actually start to produce in the fall time. And so they give us just the brilliant reds. So if you've ever seen fall up in Denali and you're seeing the tundra turn red, you're seeing those blueberry bushes turning red. Red maples are notorious for anthocyanins in them. So they are just a really special pigment that gives fall leaves the reds, purples, those deep colors. And they're kind of thinking that anthocyanins work to protect the leaves from sun damage as well, but they're still kind of figuring that out. But they do also believe that they help recover nutrients from leaves in the fall time to kind of help that cycle. So not present in the leaf, and then as fall time comes around, those anthocyanins become visible to us. And now one thing that is cool is all three of these can be seen in one leaf. I call them tie-dye leaves when you see it like that. It's just like the leaf is going crazy, and this is a great sugar maple in Maine, and it's just popping. Red, yellow, orange. You even got some like lime green going on in the background. That can be really great. So yeah, now I'm going to just kind of jump into some destination specifics and places you can see fall time. And so, obviously based off of latitude, where you're going to see fall is going to vary dramatically. And so for me this year, August 28th rolled around, I was in Denali National Park, and we were looking at fantastic fall colors. Just the trees were great. The tundra was great. So it is kind of amazing to think that you can start your fall time, your leaf peeping, chasing the colors. That can start in late August if you go far enough north. So pretty amazing. Now in Denali, for example, it's a very unique fall because it's not like it's not like New England at all. It's actually the ground. The tundra is going to turn these incredible swaths of orange, red from the blueberry bushes, and then also the dwarf birch. Those are some amazing trees. So it's a totally unique type of fall. And so you can almost read the landscape by the colors, which is a really cool thing. So you're standing out, you have these huge expanses, and you can see where the blueberry bushes are. And then you can also see a big water drainage. If you're looking at this photo, kind of the further right side in the tundra, I could tell from just here, there's some water over there because of the vegetation shift. And so we jokingly call this ketchup and mustard land, because it looks like someone literally took a bottle of ketchup and a bottle of mustard and squirted it all throughout the tundra. And it just is very unique and fascinating. And then, of course, this is an incredibly important time for wildlife, especially in places like Denali, where you have a healthy grizzly bear population. But if you're on the north side of the Alaska Range in Denali National Park, these bears don't have abundant access to salmon. So these grizzly bears have to rely heavily on berries. That's a huge part of their diet. And so when they go into hyperphagia, it's estimated that a grizzly bear is going to need to eat roughly 100 pounds of blueberries a day to meet their increased energy demands. And then there was one study where they went through and they found that a male grizzly bear during hyperphagia consumed roughly 200,000 berries per day during these peak berry seasons. So that's just insane to think about a bear eating that many berries in one day. But as they have that increased need for food during hyperphagia, it's definitely, they're going to be eating what's around, and berries are a vital food source. And so they've recognized that hyperphagia is a critical time for the bears in Denali. and especially amongst the female bears, and how if they had a successful late fall in terms of feeding, the cub survival rate was a lot higher. So it is just a vitally important time to the bears, all around, not just Denali. It rings true for, bears all around. Hyperphagia, as fall is going into winter time, they can sense that seasonal shift. And so they need to pack on the pounds for sure. And then, in terms of Alaska and landscapes with fall colors, this is a great hike we get to do on the Ultimate Alaska trip into Kachemak Bay State Park. And, obviously just stunning, where you can get this glacial blue ice popping with the yellow trees behind it, and then the mountains. Definitely, I'm a huge fan of fall time and photographing it. And when we got up here on this day of the trip, I was just ecstatic because the colors were amazing, and that contrast from the blue ice to the yellow trees was amazing. And then, shifting gears a little bit, and we're heading over to New England, a place that doesn't need much of an introduction when it comes to fall colors. But, New England, in a sense, I just think it's one of those places that you think about New England, and fall time is generally a time you think of there. Whether it's a fireplace going on, just a quaint little town kind of dotted with oak trees, maples, beach. There's such a swath of amazing forests in New England that it does add just so much to the landscape. And then of course, one of the incredible trees of New England that a lot of people come to see, and it's not just in New England, but the colors in New England are typically the best in Maine and New England, with this sugar maple. And they're just spectacular for their fall colors because of the sugars that are within the tree, and so sugar maples are essentially famous for maple syrup, right? We all love maple syrup with our pancakes, but they're going to have about 2 to 3% sugar within them. And so that sap is mostly water, about 2 to 3% sugar, and it's going to take roughly 40 gallons of sugar maple sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup, because that sap's got to be boiled down and concentrate those sugars. And so it's kind of fascinating that they're actually doing a lot of genetic studies on specific trees that are big producers, and potentially trying to clone those trees in a way to get the most efficient sap producing trees that they can find. So that's kind of some up and coming research that's going on with sugar maples, because there is a fear with the shifting climate, the sugar maples could get outcompeted by red maples. And so here is the sugar maple range. So pretty confined northern New England, kind of heading over towards Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and then where you're going to find it in the South, like in Tennessee, West Virginia, is you're going to find those sugar maples typically a little higher in elevation, whereas our famous red maple, very widespread throughout the United States in many ways. A lot to do with ornamentals being planted in people's yards and by city planners. City planners have fallen in love with the red maples, but in recent times I've come to learn that planting one species of maple tree in your city might not be the best call. But red maple is absolutely fantastic, really rich in those anthocyanins, so you can just get some amazing colors with the red maple. The red maple is a pretty hardy tree. Nicknamed the swamp maple, summit maple. You can find them just about anywhere. They could grow in some pretty treacherous places. Also can grow right off a sidewalk. So they're pretty resourceful and resilient. But they're not producing that same sugar that the sugar maples do. So they're not as known for maple syrup and stuff like that. But they are a fall time favorite, and you can see them all throughout the country, especially in cities that they've been planted. But this is the red maples range. So like I've seen a red maple in fall colors down in Florida. I've seen it down there. The colors down in Florida aren't as great because they don't have the extended cold nights like you have up in New England, but they exist down there. Caddo Lake over in Texas, so down in the kind of the southern part, but they do stretch pretty far north. So a pretty wide range on the red maple in comparison to that sugar maple. And then, maples in general are just incredible because there are over 100 species of maples found worldwide. In the US, we have roughly a dozen maple species. And then, shockingly, as I learned for this, was China is actually the kind of the hot spot in the world for maples. They have what's kind of close to 80 to 100 species of maple because there's so much habitat in China. So, maybe on our China trip, I have seen some awesome photos of fall colors from that. I'm going to have to look back and see if they happen to be maples because definitely from everything I've learned is China is the hotspot of diversity on maples in the world. But New England does get a big reputation for maples and absolutely steals the show when it comes to fall colors. Another tree that we find in Maine that's really cool and not many people know about it is the big-tooth aspen. I think a lot of us are familiar with the West and the quaking aspen, but the big-tooth aspen is just a really unique tree, comes from these big teeth that are on the leaf. And you can actually see just like it kind of gets like an orangish yellow. It can work really well, whereas we do have quaking aspen on the East Coast. They get kind of referred to as trembling aspen on the East Coast. But the big-tooth aspens seem to do a little bit better in those mixed stanza forests, which the East Coast is known for. So just a range map on that big-tooth aspen, you can see it's not leaving the eastern part of the country. And I'll talk a little bit more about quaking aspen here in a little bit. But if you remember me talking about conifers earlier, I did mention I was going to talk about one deciduous conifer, and this is the tamarack, also known as the eastern larch. So this eastern larch, there's also a western larch as well, and you can get involved with what's known as larch madness, where you're kind of chasing these incredible conifers, and as fall progresses, the tamaracks or larches, they turn this just ridiculously cool yellow color, but very unique for a conifer to shed its needles and essentially lose them. So it makes it really, really tough for the wintertime, and they can be in some tough soils. Like this one here is in a bog, so just really not much soil going on, a lot of peat moss around, highly acidic, and the tamarack is thriving, and then it's eventually going to lose those needles after they kind of turn a golden color. But they're just amazing trees, super fascinating. And then, another thing about fall in New England that's really cool are the mushrooms. The mushrooms they're flourishing in the fall time in New England and Alaska and these kind of wetter places as you get nice cool temperatures, frequent rains, and all that decaying leaf litter. It's a perfect mixture for moisture and nutrient growth for the mushrooms, for that fruiting body of the mushroom to become visible for us from the mycelium networks that are underneath the ground. But definitely an awesome part of fall time, wherever you're at, is definitely keep your eye out for the mushrooms that are coming in, especially after if you get a big rain event. And then finishing up here on Maine is we get a lot of late season flowers, which surprise a lot of people, and they're so vitally important. This here is a monarch butterfly, enjoying some goldenrod. Now, this is a huge gas station fill up for these monarchs because they're on their way to Mexico to go down to those Oyamel forests to overwinter. But they're going to need fuel to get down those thousands of miles. And these late season flowers, not only are they beautiful, they're vitally important for our late season pollinators. So butterflies, bees, all of that. And so we have typically the ones we see the most of in Maine are the American aster and then the goldenrod. Those are just kind of some big late season blooms for us. So just incredible. Now, kind of shifting over to the western part of the United States, we have obviously the Tetons. The Tetons are an amazing, just an absolutely amazing place to experience and witness fall. Now, the Tetons don't have as high of a tree diversity as you're going to find on the East Coast. There's going to be one specific tree that's really going to dominate the landscape there, and that's going to be the quaking aspen in terms of giving those just amazing colors. But the gold from the aspen is fantastic, especially if you can, photograph with the Tetons in the backdrop. So this is just sunrise from one of the many iconic views. But you can, if you're looking at these photos, you can see how much the fall colors add to the photography aspect of it. Now, in the Rocky Mountains, essentially these quaking aspen are all connected via one root system. So they're a clonal species. You might be familiar with the Pando Grove down in Utah. Utah is another great place for fall colors. But the quaking aspen are essentially all just one big root system, and then new trees sprout off that root system. So they're all connected, and that's one of the main reasons why when you see a big stand of quaking aspen out in the West, they're all somewhat together, kind of in a similar area, and that is because they're all off that same clonal root system. So it's just an absolutely incredible thing to see, and they do get their name from that kind of the quaking aspect of it. So they kind of wave a little bit when the wind hits them, and I do think they just have an amazing gold shimmer that happens in the fall time. So you can see their range, and then so you can, if you can remember back to that big tooth aspen range, primarily in the east, there is quaking aspen in the east, but this is going to be the dominant deciduous tree out in the west because they're going to come in after some form of event such as a wildfire, and they're going to come through and be kind of a dominant species there. And so that's where quaking aspen do come in and do really well. And so you can see all these little pockets of quaking aspen throughout the country, even down into Mexico. And so typically if you're seeing them in the Rockies or Utah, places like that, you're going to find them up at higher elevations. And so really just amazing if you ever get to see the aspen trees in the fall time. It's incredible. Not just the leaves, just kind of being in one of the aspen groves it's a spiritual experience, I think, in many ways, because just the bark is so beautiful, the trees are just shimmering. Yeah, definitely a lot of magic in there. Now, one thing that we love in the Tetons in the fall time are the moose, of course. So you have the Shiras moose in the Tetons, that subspecies of moose. But if you get lucky enough and you can, spot a moose in the fall time with the aspen around them, just absolutely fantastic. And in the fall, the male moose are entering the rut. They're essentially their breeding season, and it's driven by just a huge surge in testosterone. And so they're going to become a lot more active, potentially aggressive, especially towards other competitors, other male moose, sparring with bulls and traveling just long distances to find mates. But I find during the rut, if you can, find where the moose are hanging out, where they are, you have a great opportunity for photographing moose, especially with great light and fall colors. And, not just for photography, just observing them in that scene is just unbelievable. And so the last location I'm going to, kind of hone in on here is down in South America. And so, down in Patagonia, you just have these awe-inspiring landscapes. And I've spent a lot of time down in Patagonia, but my first few times down there were summertime. And then I ended up down there in fall, and I just couldn't believe how this landscape with just mesmerizing peaks all of a sudden got that much more incredible. Now you have just you have these what's known as, they're essentially a type of beech tree. So you have two major types of trees down in Patagonia that are going to be kind of our fall time artists. One is called the lenga. That's what I've always heard it referred to. It is a type of beech tree. And the lenga forms really large swaths of forest. So they're just going to be like, if you're looking out and it's just a big trunk of huge amounts of color, that's most likely your lenga. They're going to be up in higher elevations. And so the other one is also known as the nere. I've heard it called the Antarctic beech. And so the nere is going to be a little bit more of a lower elevation tree, and they can be isolated. So it can be kind of a standalone tree. That's going to be your nere. Now, down in Patagonia, these forests, they're often kind of called like the subantarctic or Magellanic forests, and they grow right up to the tree line on Cape Horn. So these are essentially the southernmost forests on the planet. And so they are just uniquely adapted for harsh, windy, cold environments that are just really, really tough. And just it's a tough place to be a tree, because if you've ever gone down to Patagonia in the summertime, you've potentially experienced those fierce winds that Patagonia has. So that's one thing I do like to note, is just like you think about these trees, we get to see them in these beautiful colors, but these are very hardy trees with a deep root system that's going to go down to get the nutrients out and to kind of feed that process. But definitely one of the hardiest tree species I've ever seen. And I love it, kind of like the sub-Antarctic forest. Something about that's just pretty magical. Another amazing thing that's kind of taken place in Patagonia in the last few years is the advent of puma tourism. Now, if you're not familiar, in parks like Torres del Paine, puma viewing, so checking out what we call a mountain lion in the United States, it's become very popular, and they're having a lot more success than they used to in the past. And so fall can be just an amazing time to go out and view this magical animal, because you have great light early in the morning, but these pumas are also sensing a seasonal shift. Unlike a bear, pumas don't hibernate, so they're out year round, and they're very effective hunters year round. But they are sensing that daylight shift, and so they might have a little bit more of uptick in their hunting. And you also can think that, as these trees have lost their leaves, that does also give pumas a slight advantage, to be able to see a little bit further as well. So that's a really cool thing to think about. And I know we have some great trips that go down there. Definitely something worth going to check out at some point. Just mainly for views like this, where you have the famous, the towers of Torres del Paine, but then you can photograph them with fantastic fall colors. I think it adds so much to this already amazing landscape. So definitely Patagonia should be on your list of places to check out during that fall time season. That's for sure. So yeah, a couple of just kind of fall time tips I'd like to throw out there for folks before we head over into the questions, and look like we have some good time for questions. But one is going to be, fall is a change of the seasons. So please always be prepared for weather wherever you are, whether it's Maine, Alaska, Patagonia, the canyons of the American Southwest, checking out polar bears. I've heard some really good things about polar bears in fall colors from some trips this year. But there's going to be a change of seasons. And with that change of seasons comes colder temperature, wet temperature. So, a good rain jacket, I think, is a great thing to have. Another thing that I think a lot of us love about fall time is the crowds are a lot less than they were in the summertime, but definitely be prepared for crowds. You're not going to be the only person out there, that's for sure. But the crowds are greatly diminished from the summertime rush as kids are back in school. You might see a little bit of an uptick on weekends, but that's about it. And then just in terms of photography, be creative. I think there's a lot of cool, unique shots that can happen from fall time that aren't just that classic, great expanse with colors. This is a bunch of leaves that fell into a little puddle right off the side of a trail. And of course, just absolutely unique and beautiful in its own way, but just different. And then a couple books I absolutely love are going to be The Hidden Life of Trees. That's an amazing one, just talking about that wood wide web and the connection that all these trees are communicating with one another. And then one's going to be called Entangled Life. So Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. Just so fascinating about the mycelium network. So these kind of the mushroom communities that work within these forests, and how some mushrooms are very beneficial to trees. Some mushrooms like to steal from trees, and a lot of the good that mushrooms can do for us in this forest community and on a global scale. So definitely Hidden Life of Trees and Entangled Life are just awesome reads. Definitely recommend checking them out before you get out there into the forest. And then, last recommendation is going to be essentially, if you're looking to go on a trip with Nat Hab, some of our trips are very specific towards fall time colors. It's like the Maine season is dedicated to fall, but some trips have summertime departures and fall time departures. So I would ask your adventure specialist which departure is going to be the best one for you and what you want to see. So with that, I'll open it up to some questions.
Oh, Arthur, that was great. Thank you so much for that exploration of the fall colors, all the way from the north to the south, east, west, all over. That was wonderful. As we were talking before, I just spent all of the fall season in the Tetons, then came back to the Midwest, and the colors are starting here. And I had the opportunity to spend the fall in Patagonia as well. So you are so right. There is not, I don't know if there's anything more beautiful than Patagonia fall. It is stunning.
Caught me by surprise, that's for sure. I didn't realize it.
Absolutely. Well, just as Arthur said, everyone, we have time for some Q&A. So in your control panel, there's a little questions box. Go ahead and put your questions in there, and we'll see how many we can get through before the top of the hour. So we do have some good ones coming in. Could you explain time ranges for a lot of these main destinations? So let's do Tetons, New England, and Patagonia. What are peak months if somebody wants to go leaf peeping around the world?
No, absolutely. So I'll start up in Alaska. That's going to be kind of the end of August in Denali, sometime around August 25th until September 10th. Anywhere in that range. I've seen essentially fall colors within that range. New England is going to be a little bit later than that, of course, and that's going to be sometime around September 30th to October 15th. So somewhere in there, it's going to be a great time for fall colors. And then down in Patagonia, it's going to be kind of around late March, early April is a great time for fall colors. April kind of can extend through, especially if you're kind of moving from location to location. Patagonia is a big place. So if you were to go further north up to, for example, Bariloche, something like that, you'd extend your fall season by a little bit. And then over in the Tetons, I've seen just amazing fall colors sometime around September 25th. Somewhere in there. And I know for some of our trips, if you were to go on the website, for example, you could see some do have like fall foliage associated with it. And those are typically great dates. Just know earlier on in those date range, you're probably not going to experience peak colors, but you might experience great colors with a little bit of nicer weather. And then so later on, you might get to see kind of peak colors with tougher weather, and that tougher weather could just be extremely cold, a little wetter. So it's kind of a variability on what you want. So if you're like, I want to go see Maine fall, but I want a little bit warmer weather, look at some of those earlier departures. But if you're like, I don't care about cold, you could check out some of those later departures for sure.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. It's very helpful for us when we're planning our leaf peeping trips. Great here. So next, and this is a similar note, how is climate change affecting the times that we're seeing peak colors?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely changing what was once a lot more predictable in terms of fall colors. For example, I worked for a company in Bar Harbor, Maine, many years ago, and the owner said, "Oh, it's just the holiday weekend in October. That is always going to be peak fall." And I talked to him recently, and he said, "Yeah, I've seen peak fall October 5th, and I've also seen it October 20th." So it's just kind of changed the date range dramatically, because climate change doesn't necessarily just mean warmer temperatures. It just means a wide shift in temperatures, wetter falls as well. So it's just kind of made the date range a little harder to pinpoint. So that's definitely added something to the equation for sure.
Fantastic. Next here, could you help us identify what maple trees are the ones that are yellow? Are they also sugar maples or are they a different species?
So in the US, we have, like I said earlier, we have 12 to 13 different types of maples. So it could be based off where you're at distinction wise, but I'll just use the sugar maple and the red maple for an example. So on the sugar maple, if you're looking at that leaf, there's going to be almost a big U between the points. And on the red maple, it's going to almost come to 3 prominent points. And I like to think RED. So you have the RED for red maple, and then the sugar maple is going to have that big U in there. Now, I will say the sugar maple and the Norwegian maple, you can mix them up, looking at both of them. There are some kind of slight variations on that. Those two would be kind of the hardest to ID together. Now, if you're looking at a maple and it has just this huge broad leaf, I call it like a dinner plate leaf. That could be a striped maple. It's an understory tree though. You would honestly throw you off to even think it's a maple, but it does get really nice colors, and it is a vitally important food source for moose and deer as well. But yeah, I think if it's a yellow, it's going to be probably a sugar maple. It would be my guess from here, but hard to say without looking at it.
Great, thank you. Could you please repeat really fast those 2 book recommendations that you had?
Absolutely. So Hidden Life of Trees is the first one, and that is going to cover forests from Africa to the United States. It's an amazing book. Talks a lot about beech forests in Germany. And then the next one is going to be called Entangled Life. And so Entangled Life is all about the mushroom communities and the mycelium network, and it's amazing. And if you do like audiobooks, Entangled Life is a great audiobook. Merlin Sheldrake is from the UK. His voice is just great. He reads it, and don't want to say I've fallen asleep to it, but it's a good one.
I'm gonna have to add that to my list too. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I have
That's a good
always
one.
listening to 1 or 2, I'm listening to, and then I'm always reading 1 or 2. It's pretty crazy.
Oh, definitely.
Oh, awesome. Since you're also a photographer, what camera gear is a must if somebody's going out to photograph the colors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, gear wise, so many great makes and bodies this day and age: Canon, Fuji, Sony. I like to think lenses on this, and for me personally, I want a wide angle, so a more landscaped style lens. And so I'm using a 1680, for example, so I can get really wide landscapes, and I can also zoom in a little bit. But then I do also love a good telephoto for this, where I can zoom all the way in on a landscape and kind of get that forest, just like a big swath of forest all in one photo. So I have shown a couple photos throughout this presentation that have been taken with telephoto, and I think it's a great use for a telephoto lens, is kind of photographing the forest from a distance and trying to get it as a big scale on it. So yeah, nice wide angle lens, and then a telephoto. I personally don't use polarizers because you can do a lot of that stuff in post-processing this day and age. So I'm not using any polarizers. But it's definitely fun to play with. And I mean, as a photographer, I don't know if it gets much better than the fall for photography.
Great. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Next here, could you explain exactly what causes the different colors? Is it temperature that causes, so like, if we have the yellows, but then some trees are red, what is causing the actual shift?
No, so the different colors actually come from the different pigments within the leaves. So if you're getting a yellow or an orange, that's coming from the carotenoid family group. And that the yellows are going to be actually a pigment called xanthophyll, and xanthos in Greek means yellow, and phyllum means leaf. So it's just essentially yellow leaf. And then carotenoids are going to give you those bright and brilliant oranges. So those are the two pigments that are giving you the yellows and the oranges, and they are present in the leaf the entire time. They're just being masked by the chlorophyll, which is the dominant pigment. Then the anthocyanins, they are created in the fall time, and they give you the reds. So a red maple has a lot of anthocyanins in it. Blueberries, that's one that has a lot of anthocyanins in it. So like I said, yellows and oranges are going to be from the carotenoid family group, and then those reds are going to come from the anthocyanins.
Great. And is this all based on time of day, or does temperature also play a role in the color that it's specifically showing at that time?
Great question. Yeah, so temperature and timing is going to play more of a role in vibrancy. So that's going to give you more, what's going to give you a more vibrant is going to be the temperature, that photo period, that amount of daylight, and the amount of precipitation that it's received. That's going to have a lot to do with the vibrancy on it. And then the other pigments are going to be there kind of providing the color. Hope that answered it.
Yeah, that was great. No, that was fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great question.
Awesome. Yeah, and just since you did open up talking about like pine needles, do they work similarly? Do they have stomata? Is that how a tree does its whole carbon cycle with needles
Yes.
too?
Yeah, it can. Yeah, absolutely. So it's great, and that's why that tamarack is such a unique conifer, where it sheds those needles. That's just such a unique one. But in the wintertime, conifers, while they are photosynthesizing, they're doing it less in the wintertime. So it's just light is at a minimum. They might be covered by snow. It might be extra cloudy, just experiencing more weather. So they're doing it a lot less, but that is the way they're doing it.
Fantastic. Well, we're getting really close to the bottom of the hour, so I'll go ahead and close the Q&A portion for now. So Arthur, I would turn it to you for any last closing comments.
Well, I just want to say thank you all so much for tuning in. And, it's one of my absolute favorite times of the year to get out, not just guiding, but just to get out in nature and enjoy it, from hiking and photographing. Once the heat of the summer's gone away and we can go out and all the mosquitoes are gone, I can go out and experience just walking in the rainbow forests, and just love fall time. So thank you all so much for tuning in.
Oh, could not agree more. It's my favorite time of year. Now, in multiple places around the world, it's my favorite time. So, Arthur, thank you so much for giving us this great presentation today. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. If you're interested in information on how you can travel with Nat Hab, give us a call at 800-543-8917 or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are more than happy to help you. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and the replay will be available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.